Microsoft Azure offers three primary service models for cloud computing. IaaS, which means Infrastructure as a Service, PaaS, which means Platform as a Service, and SaaS, which means Software as a Service. Important for all these models is the shared responsibility paradigm. You're looking at a graphic from Microsoft's documentation which details this. When you're running on-premise, which is the option to the far right, all responsibility lies with you, or rather, your company or contractor. The more you move to the left of the graphic, you can see the responsibilities shift. In IaaS, most of the responsibility is still at your level, while in SaaS, most of the responsibility is with Microsoft. This is important. The less responsibility you have, the more you can focus on other things. It typically leads to much faster usage of services and or time to market. However, it also means less control. A typical example would be the operating system. In the Platform as a Service model, PaaS, Microsoft is responsible for the operating system, so they will make sure patches and updates are applied and correctly configured. And that is very convenient, and it's also a time saver. But it also means that you don't have control over it. For example, if you still have a legacy app somewhere that requires a specific OS version, or if you can't deal with a certain patch, then Platform as a Service is not an option. IaaS, so Infrastructure as a Service, would be an option, albeit one that will require more management on your side. So the first one is Infrastructure as a Service, or IaaS. It allows you to provision virtual machines along with associated networking and storage components. With this model, you have control over the operating system and the applications running on these VMs. A typical use case is the lift and shift. In other words, shifting existing workloads to the cloud. And you can do that then without redesigning the application. So you take whatever you have in your local data center and you put it in a virtual machine running on Azure. Examples of Azure services that fit in this model are Azure Virtual Machines. So deploy and manage VMs within an Azure Virtual Network. Then you have Azure Disk Storage. This provides durable block storage for the virtual machines. And then you have Azure Virtual Network, which isolates and securely connects resources. It is, in my opinion, not a very interesting model, as you're not really using the cloud for development in this model. The second one is Platform as a Service, or PaaS, and this is the most interesting one for us. It offers a managed environment for developing, deploying, and running apps. That means that as a developer, we can now focus on coding without managing the underlying infrastructure. Typical use cases are building web apps, building mobile app backends or RESTful APIs, but also leveraging cloud-native features and scalability. This model makes it really easy to scale up your API, for example, if more requests start coming in. It also tends to accelerate development cycles, as the cloud provider, Microsoft, takes up a part of the responsibility that would otherwise end up on our backs, like ensuring that the operating system is set up correctly, ensuring that the correct .NET version is installed, that patches are regularly applied, and so on. Examples of Azure services that fit in this model are 1. The Azure App Service. This is a service that hosts web apps, APIs, and mobile backends. 2. Azure Functions. This provides serverless compute for event-driven apps, and Azure Logic Apps automates workflows and integrates services. Lastly, there's the Software as a Service model. This model delivers ready-to-use applications over the internet. Users access these applications without having to worry about infrastructure or maintenance. Typical use cases are, well, things we all use every day probably. Lots of email, calendar, and other Office apps are now offered as software as a service. Microsoft 365, which includes apps like Outlook, Word, and Teams, is an example. But also Azure DevOps, which manages software development processes. and Dynamics 365, which offers CRM and ERP solutions. For us and for this course, it's pretty clear that the platform as a service model is the most interesting one. The services we will use will largely live in this model. Talking about services, let's have a look at the core services Azure has to offer. So, Azure offers more than 200 services, but some of them are considered to be core services as they are so fundamental to building and managing apps. They fall into 4 main categories. Category 1, compute. This category includes services related to processing and running apps. Some key compute services in Azure are Azure Virtual Machines, which provide scalable, virtualized computing resources. Azure App Service. This is a platform for building, deploying and scaling web and mobile apps. We will actually use that one soon. And Azure Functions, which are event-driven serverless services. 2. Networking. Azure networking services facilitate communication between resources. Notable networking services include 1. The Virtual Network or VNet. This isolates network traffic. 2. The Azure Load Balancer. This distributes incoming traffic across multiple VMs. The third category of core services is storage. Azure Storage Services handle data storage and retrieval. Key storage services include Azure Blob Storage, which stores unstructured data like images, videos, and backups, and Azure Table Storage, which is a NoSQL data store for semi-structured data. We will look into both in this course. The fourth main category of core services are database services. Azure offers various database services for different needs. An example is the Azure SQL Database Service. This is a managed relational database service. We will look into this one as well. Another example is Azure Cosmos DB, which is a globally distributed NoSQL database. Now, truth be told, your mileage may vary a bit. What's considered core in general may not be core for your specific use case as you have no need for it. That being said, in general, the services I mentioned are used for a lot of Azure workloads. And with that, you should have a good idea of what Azure is. Now let's set up your local environment so you can get started. So, the first thing you'll need is an Azure account. The easiest way to get that is probably through your employer. If you're a developer for a firm that wants you to learn Azure, chances are that they have an agreement with Microsoft regarding providing Azure accounts to the developers and teammates that work for them. If that isn't the case, but you have a Visual Studio subscription, then you have free monthly credits on Azure which you can activate via the link you currently see on screen. Simply click the blue Activate Your Azure Credits button to get started. The account linked to your Visual Studio subscription then automatically becomes your Azure account. If you have none of these, you can simply start with a free Azure account which you can create via the link on screen. Such an account will give you access to popular services for free for 12 months, free access to a bunch of services forever, and some Azure credit, more than enough to complete this course. With that, you have an Azure account. The next step is now setting up your development environment, Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. If you are using Visual Studio, make sure that you have installed the ASP.NET and web development workloads and the Azure development workloads. You can see I checked both on my local development environment. Once you have those, you can authenticate Visual Studio with Azure. You will automatically get asked to sign in once you try, for example, to publish something to Azure. But if you don't want to wait for that and you just want to check whether everything is set up correctly, you can also search for Azure Service Authentication, which will open the Options menu, and there you can select the account you want to use to authenticate with Azure. This should be your Azure account. If you prefer to use Visual Studio Code instead of Visual Studio, you should install the Azure tools for Visual Studio Code. You can find that via the link on screen. And once you have all of that, the last thing to install is the Azure CLI. The Azure CLI, or Azure Command Line Interface, is a command line tool which we will use throughout the course to create and manage Azure resources. You will notice soon that in Azure, most tasks can be completed in different ways. You can manage and create resources via the Azure portal, which we'll immediately look at. But that tends to involve a lot of clicking around. If you do the same thing via the CLI, all you need to do is execute a command or a script. You can download and install the Azure CLI for your operating system of choice via the link on screen. Once that is done, you can check if it's installed correctly via the Windows command prompt or PowerShell. If you can execute the AZ command, you're good to go. And there we go, that seems to have worked on my machine. If you previously installed the Azure CLI, as I did, it's possible that a new version has been released since. To update the CLI, you can execute the AZ upgrade command. Seems like there's an upgrade. Let's install this. And there we go. I see that to update any potential extensions that are installed, AZ upgrade should be run again after having completed the upgrade. So just to be sure, let's do that. This is already a small preview of what we will use throughout the course, because we will effectively use the Service Connector passwordless extension. And there we go. It's done. I'm good to go. And with that, you should also have everything you need installed on your machine to get going. And let's do that by starting with the basics. Let's learn how Azure resources are organized.